Hey, so this is going to be the first in a series of videos where I will talk through how to plan a hike. When I start getting into the details of things, I'm going to be focused on the JMT. However, this first episode, which is more generally talking about planning trips and what you need to be thinking about, what you need to be looking for on maps, what sort of timing and other concerns you need to have in mind as you put things together, all of that will really be applicable to any hike that you're doing. If you're going to do something on the coast like the West Coast Trail, you're probably going to want to take into account things like tide tables, etc., that I'm not really going to get into. So maybe I should clarify that by saying this is about inland hikes and mountain hikes, but anything in that territory, this will help you a lot. And many things will probably still apply to other types of hikes. I just don't want to overstate. As I said, this episode is going to be more focused on what's involved in planning. Rather than going through these maps, I'm going to talk about planning more generally, what you need to take into account, as well as have a quick tutorial on how to put something together in Gaia GPS. Because I think that digital maps, which could be Gaia GPS or CalTopo, I think CalTopo is more accurate than Gaia GPS, but I think Gaia GPS is just easier to use for people who are new. We're going to use Gaia GPS, but just know that CalTopo is going to be a little bit more accurate. Okay, so I think the first thing that we need to cover, the elephant in the room, is what is the point of planning? It's important to realize when you get out there that everything that you put down on paper is going to be more of reference information. You're not actually going to hike the days that you put on paper in all likelihood. And you want it to be that way. You want to have the freedom to make different choices going on the trail, maybe go a couple miles longer, maybe don't go as far, whatever it is. You want to have that flexibility. So what we're putting together here is more about t-shirt sizing, making sure you're going to finish things and get to places in time, give or take a day, and understanding what's involved in each section of the trail. If you plan out each section of the trail, taking into account everything that you should be keeping in mind, it's going to help you make sure that you know everything when you're on trail. And this is part of why I suggest that whatever hike you're doing, you get a set of maps and you take notes on them. It doesn't matter if it's a set of maps like this. This is the 13-page Tom Harrison map set for the John Muir Trail. It doesn't matter if you have something like this, which is the anti-gravity gear elevation profile. And on a well-marked trail, honestly, all you need is an elevation profile, as long as you're not too worried about getting turned around and going on the wrong trail. There are also guidebooks out there, and the guidebooks can be fantastic. They'll have a lot of additional information, more along the lines of what I'm presenting here, that can add color and depth to what you're trying to understand about the trail to make sure that you know what you need to know when you're trying to make a decision about whether you're going to hike an extra 2 miles at the end of the day, or whether you're going to take a break now because there either won't be water in a couple miles, or you're going to have trouble finding a place to camp because the terrain's too steep, things like that. So that's the point. You're getting familiar with the trail. Along those lines, when you're looking at maps, when you're going through things in Gaia GPS or whatever it is, you're going to want to look at where the passes are and other high points, where the water sources are, where your resupplies are, any hours related to those resupplies that you might need to take into account, where there are flat areas or areas that might be good to camp, whether it's in the green areas on your map, which indicate forest or relatively protected areas, the more exposed rocky areas that might have better views, but are also more likely to be colder and to have more wind. Probably most important for timing is making sure that you know the scale of each day, how many miles you're doing, as well as how many feet of elevation gain and loss you're doing. It's also worth noting that getting that elevation when you have a different starting point, so if you're starting at 10,000 feet and going to 14, that's very different from starting at 6,000 and going to 10,000. You will definitely notice a difference, and you're gonna have to take that into account when you're planning things and make sure that you aren't expecting to be able to do 5,000 feet of elevation starting at 10,000 feet if normally you have difficulty doing 5,000 feet of elevation starting at 4,000 or 5,000 feet. I already hinted at it, but you wanna think about timing in this process. You wanna think about whether there are any dry sections of trail. So when you're looking at things, you want to make sure you know how often you're going to hit water and how reliable that water is as best you can. Anything when you're looking at a map that is a dark blue line is going to be more likely to be reliable, especially if it's a set of 2 lines with a little drawn in river that's a bit wider. Those are going to be very reliable sources of water. Anything that's a thin line is going to be a little less reliable. Anything that is a dotted line or has any markings in the lake other than, say, islands is probably indicating that that lake is going to be less reliable. Maybe it's on the verge of becoming a meadow, so there's going to be a lot of grass in it that absorbs much of the water quickly, or maybe it's just a seasonal pond in some areas. Other things you need to keep in mind are when you're going to get to your resupplies. Usually resupply places tend to have hours. Now, if you're resupplying at a trailhead where there are bear boxes that you know are going to have enough room for you to leave food there for a day or two, then you're not as worried about when you get there. However, if you're picking up food at VVR, at MTR, at Red's Meadow, or any place like that, maybe you're mailing it to a post office like the post office at Tuolumne Meadows, anything like that, you're going to need to be there during their business hours. And that can make a big difference in terms of your schedule. For instance, post offices tend not to be open on weekends for as long of hours. You need to make sure that the post office is going to be open when you go to pick up that resupply. Also, places like MTR tend to have operating hours where maybe you can't be there outside of, and I don't remember if these are the exact numbers, but the key thing is these places have hours, and if you aren't going to be there during those hours, you aren't going to get your resupply. Make sure that when you're planning, you take that into account. Last but not least, and sometimes not as important, is when you clear passes. Generally, if you're going to clear a pass, you want to do it in the morning, preferably before 2 p.m. at very latest. The reason is, in the morning, you tend to have high pressure areas around the mountains, which blow all your bad weather away. But later in the afternoon, things cool down on one side of the mountain, and that cooling air creates a low pressure area, which draws in bad weather. So you're much more likely to have a bad thunderstorm in the afternoon in the mountains, and a lot less likely to have it in the morning. In clear weather, it's not really a problem. And this problem becomes less of an issue the faster you're going. The key thing is you want to make sure that you can get off the pass in time, and that's why you want to make sure you get over that pass relatively early in the day. Okay, next, when we're talking about getting familiar with the trail, is that we need to make sure we understand the scale of the challenge that we're setting ourselves up for. This is probably going to involve some practice hikes for you, because you need to know how big of a challenge that elevation is going to be, how big of a challenge that distance is going to be. These are the things that you need to know to make sure that you're going to be able to finish on time. And just as important, make sure that you're going to have enough time left over after you're done hiking to do things like go fishing and go swimming and take pictures and put together a nice meal the afternoon. Like, you need to do these things on your hike, because that's a lot of what adds up to enjoying the experience. You aren't in a race out there. It's kind of easy to get in this whole idea of trying to get from A to B within a certain amount of time. And for some people who are, say, runners or something like that, that's going to be the way that they think. And I'm not trying to change it. You're going to hike your hike the way that you want to do it. But most people have some other things they want to do while they're out there. And if you're going to try to go fishing or something like that, you need to make sure that you put aside a few hours a day so that you pull out that fishing rod and go fishing. And if you aren't going to do that, you need to take it off the list, leave the fishing rod at home, and make sure that you're still excited about doing the trip. Last but not least, this all adds up to you needing to know how fit you need to be to do the trail the way that you're planning to do it. When you know how fit you need to be, that lets you know how much you need to prepare. And if you go out there prepared, you're going to have a good time. That's how it works. If you are ready for the challenges, you'll figure it out as long as you do a couple practice hikes, and you're going to have a great time. So the short answer to the original question of why do we plan, or why are we planning this, is so that we can know what we're up against, so we can stay oriented while we're out there, and so we can make better decisions on the trail so we can enjoy the hike. I think that's going to wrap this episode up. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Later.